Tonight at 11.
Doom!
How you doing? Thanks for checking in here. Just trying to keep it a little bit light. Gonna start with some residue, evidence of things that we think changed, which is the hunt, of course, always. And then gonna talk about something that I think is a broader scope, not directly addressing the Mandela effect, but is, in my opinion, very much related. So here is some stuff about Mandela. This is from the show Chuck. Thank you, DCACNC. Commented this on a previous video of mine.
This is Burbank, dude. Oh, whatever. Now, I would like to thank all the humanitarians that have affected my work. Mother Teresa. Nelson Mandela, God rest his soul.
2007.
Nelson Mandela, God rest his soul.
No one protesting. Okay. My fellow Americans.
Okay, I got one. When you were in the White House, who was the person you were most excited to meet?
Nelson Mandela.
I'm not a reporter.
Ella Fitzgerald. Mandela was a great man, but he couldn't sing worth shit.
1992.
Mandela was a great man, but he couldn't sing worth shit.
In trying to remember that not everybody has as much experience with computers as some of us, just a quick reminder about something that you can do to try to isolate the time frame. So put it in quotes and then go over to Tools, which is underneath the search bar thing, and then click on any time, and then go down to custom range and make it only show you results for the time frame that you're trying to see if there's evidence of something. In this case, I need it to be well before 2013 because that's when it's projected that he had died. So I am doing between 1988 and 2002. And it's only about 3 pages, but you see it says the late Nelson Mandela in 1997, 2001, 1997, 2001, 2002, 2001. Okay, you get the idea. So anyway, we're always thinking that either he was dead in 2013 or he was dead in prison, but he was released from prison in 1990, and well, the one residue that we have found from a book that I think the channel Planet Nibiru put out first, as far as I know, it's not necessarily true that if he died, he had to have died in prison, because there are other people that were reported to have been dead that all of a sudden weren't, and if we don't know them personally, how do we know if it was fake or not? And that's actually a dangerous faux pas that we can get into with where things are changed. Some of them we can't actually confirm ourselves, like our position in the galaxy. It's always just been like a public narrative, because a pretty, relevant criticism is that there are fake deaths of celebrities or something, but that's not really what that we're talking about. It's that, like, you saw the funeral on TV or something like that. But in the effort of just trying to portray this as a thing where you can be critically thinking about it, it's good to just focus on the things that are the most gnarly and the most relevant and have the most evidence and are the most crazy implicative if they're true, right? Now, I've seen some videos where people are, one crazy one I think was by Effective Collective, where he was talking to somebody who had been dead, and it was crazy. She kind of like blanked out, or just got, it was odd. But I would love to hear in the comments below if anybody has any local versions of this where a family member or friend was dead and then they weren't, or vice versa. Alright, so there's some stuff about Nelson Mandela, a little more new residue as far as I know. George, you had something you wanted to say, right?
That America's leading industry, America's most profitable business, is still the manufacture, packaging, distribution, and marketing of bullshit. High quality, grade A, prime cut, pure American bullshit. And the sad part is that most people seem to have been indoctrinated to believe that bullshit only comes from certain places, certain sources, advertising, politics, salesmen. Not true. Bullshit is everywhere. Bullshit is rampant.
A person whom I think is not of bullshit, Rupert Sheldrake. Now this guy, I originally heard of him because of his banned TED Talk called The Science Delusion. It was banned as well as some others, and then people wanted it back, so Ted put it back online, I guess, on YouTube. I'm really watering that down because there was nothing in it that should have been banned, but I also really recommend researching him if you have time because he's so good to listen to, but really quick. This isn't just like some rogue guy. He's been a biologist his whole life, and he's an academic, totally. And it's just interesting that his whole thing is promoting trying to find the truth. I'm gonna just do a little bit of back and forth between him and Michio Kaku, who's saying that certain things that the universe shouldn't exist now, which I find interesting because for so long, the widely accepted academic viewpoint of like how we're here.
But the idea is all the laws of nature were completely fixed at the moment of the Big Bang, like a cosmic Napoleonic code. As my friend Terence McKenna used to say, modern science is based on the principle, give us one free miracle and we'll explain the rest. And the one free miracle is the appearance of all the matter and energy in the universe and all the laws that govern it from nothing in a single instant.
It is suspect to me when all of a sudden it seems like there's a flip in the mainstream science community of we're all machines and accidents for so long until now when they're saying that the universe shouldn't exist, and then it's almost like they're implying, well then who designed it? And we've been seeing that all over the place, and it's complicated versions, it seems like, of intelligent design, or sometimes maybe not as complicated, such as ancient aliens and stuff like that, which basically is implying that religion comes from aliens, which basically kind of creates a new forest through some manipulated trees, and also throws out that there's one who is supreme chief who made all of this, and he's into love. All right, check this out. I learned recently that Wernher von Braun, who is one of the leading Nazi scientists that started NASA, and we apparently got him through Operation Paperclip after World War II, where we brought him over and started, utilizing his knowledge. And so Dr. Carol Rosin, who was a close assistant of his towards the end of his life, Wernher von Braun told her on his deathbed, as almost like a confession, some very interesting things.
When I was a corporate manager of Fairchild Industries in 1974 through 77, I met the late Dr. Wernher von Braun in early 74. At that time, von Braun was dying of cancer, but he assured me that he would live a few more years in order to tell me about the game that was being played. That game being the effort to weaponize space, to control the Earth from space and space itself. Von Braun's purpose in life during the last years of his life, his dying years, was to educate the public and decision makers about why space-based weapons are a dumb, dangerous, destabilizing, too costly, unnecessary, unworkable, undesirable idea. The strategy that Wernher von Braun taught me was that first the Russians are going to be considered to be the enemy. In fact, when I met him in 74, they were the enemy, the identified enemy. We were told that they had killer satellites. We were told that they were coming to get us and control us, the dirty commies, that whole story. First, the Russians were the enemy against whom we're going to build space-based weapons. Then terrorists would be identified, and that was soon to follow. We heard a lot about terrorism. Then we were going to identify third world country crazies. We now call them nations of concern. But he said that would be the third enemy against whom we would be needing to build space-based weapons. And the next enemy was asteroids. Now at this point, he kind of chuckled the first time he said it. Asteroids, against asteroids we're going to build space-based weapons. So it was funny then. And the funniest one of all was against what he called aliens, extraterrestrials. That would be the final card. And over and over and over, during the 4 years that I knew him and was giving his speeches for him, he would bring up that last card. And remember, Carol, the last card is the alien card. We're going to have to build space-based weapons against aliens. And all of it, he said, is a lie.
I don't really even have any interest in talking about the UFO thing because of my experiences with them, capturing them in video, and also the fact that it's an even more regulated and controlled situation than the Mandela effect, than the flat earth and all this stuff, because it's it's too much for me to be honest with you, and it's whatever. So also, not to mention the fact that probably partly due to Lone Eagle's great work, I've developed a addiction to Google Earth, and I have hundreds of photos of sketchy things. And not to mention, Wernher von Braun also has the Psalm 19:1 on his tombstone. That's all it says, Psalm 19:1. Pretty interesting. And I just use this as basically, all right, well, I'll keep my ears out for, you know, if they start talking about like fake aliens, or not fake, they wouldn't say it's fake, but like, hey, maybe we're designed. Oh, and then we'll tell you what a designer is, and then it's just another version of chains. This is a trend of the New World Order, and if you haven't noticed by now, I'm a person who knows about it. I'm not going to say I believe in it. I know about it. There's no point fearing it, but one of the tactics that they like to do is, you know, make a need and then give you a false answer for it. Now, Project Bluebeam is the assumption that a staged alien invasion could be and possibly is a program that's in the three-letter military agencies where basically through the technological means they're able to stage an alien invasion or an alien integration or a staged second coming of Christ. And I'm not saying that, you know, God's not coming back. I'm just saying that, like, it's a very vulnerable thing for people that want their God to come back. And, you know, I do too. But basically, you know, another way to put us in even deeper chains than, you know, we already are in, even though they're pretty illusory. Disguised as peace and security. Now, back to legitimacy. Here's one of the dogmas he says that I think I want to discuss in a part 2 that I won't discuss in this one, but it's right up there.
Dogma 7, memories are stored inside your brain as material traces. Somehow everything you remember is in your brain in modified nerve endings, phosphorylated proteins. No one knows how it works, but nevertheless, almost everyone in the scientific world believes it must be in the brain.
Now, he's not saying that as a truth. He's saying that's one of the beliefs of science in general, of all quote-unquote academically qualified people. And it's an interesting thing if it's not true, because he provides other evidence about how the mind might not actually just be in our head. And like I said, I haven't looked yet. I don't remember if I said it or not. But this means that he's got other content about it, and I'm sure it'll be interesting. So obviously, research. If anyone knows about this, I'd love to know. Please let me know in the comments. Now, every time I watch or listen to something of him, it takes me so long to digest it because I can't think highlier of this guy. He's one of my tops. And so I'm gonna have to do research to see what other stuff he says about memory and how it might not live inside your brain. And I'll have to do that in a part 2. But here we go with the aforementioned cross coverage comparison that I want to do between Michio Kaku and Rupert Sheldrake.
The science delusion is the belief that science already understands the nature of reality in principle, leaving only the details to be filled in. This is a very widespread belief in our society. It's the kind of belief system of people who say, I don't believe in God, I believe in science. It's a belief system which has now been spread to the entire world. But there's a conflict in the heart of science between science as a method of inquiry based on reason, evidence, hypothesis, and collective investigation, and science as a belief system or a worldview. And unfortunately, the worldview aspect of science has come to inhibit and constrict the free inquiry, which is the very lifeblood of the scientific endeavor. Since the late 19th century, science has been conducted under the aspect of a belief system or worldview, which is essentially that of materialism, philosophical materialism. And the sciences are now wholly owned subsidiaries of the materialist worldview.
Physicists believe that when time began, at the moment of the Big Bang, matter and antimatter were created in equal amounts. And based on recent measurements made at CERN Laboratory in Switzerland, it seems there is perfect symmetry between the two, which they say implies that our universe should not exist. What? Okay, here to talk about this perhaps disconcerting discovery is CBS News science and futurist contributor and theoretical physicist Michio Kaku. All right, Professor Kaku, so can you explain, first of all, what antimatter is and how is it different from the matter that we interact with every day?
Well, there's a Nobel Prize out there if you can figure out how this thing works. Antimatter is the mirror image of ordinary matter. It's extremely rare.
Wow!
Okay.
If I had some in my hand, it looks like ordinary matter. It has the same chemical properties, except if I touch it, it would explode and destroy all of New York City, parts of Connecticut and New Jersey.
Oh. Are you sure?
Well, in an evolutionary universe, why shouldn't the laws themselves evolve? After all, human laws do, and the idea of laws of nature is based on a metaphor with human laws. It's a very anthropocentric metaphor. Only humans have laws. In fact, only civilized societies have laws. As C.S. Lewis once said, to say that a stone falls to earth because it's obeying a law makes it a man and even a citizen. It's a metaphor that we've got so used to, we forget it's a metaphor. In an evolving universe, I think a much better idea is the idea of habits. I think the habits of nature evolve. The regularities of nature are essentially habitual.
Every Star Trek fan knows that this is the greatest energy source in the universe.
This isn't Star Trek!
Every Star Trek fan...
This isn't Star Trek!
This is supposed to be...
Science!
The truth.
Every Star Trek fan knows that this is the greatest energy source in the universe. Matter, antimatter collision.
Okay, all right, so that's it. Well,
That's it? That's it?
well, what is it about this symmetry between matter and antimatter that, you know, leads CERN's physicists to this conclusion that we shouldn't exist, the universe shouldn't exist?
Well, at the inset of the Big Bang, there should have been equal quantities of matter, antimatter. Which
Says who?
There should have been equal quantities of matter, antimatter, which annihilated, driving the Big Bang. So, by rights, we shouldn't be here.
Right.
Alrighty then.
Because we have more matter than antimatter in our sector of the galaxy. We've looked for anti-galaxies. We've looked for anti-planets. We don't see any.
I don't even understand what that means, but okay, go ahead. Antimatter, anti-planets, because they would be made up of anti.
That's right. There should be anti-people, in fact. Anti-love, anti-CBS.
But essentially, the 10 dogmas, which are the default worldview of most educated people all over the world, are first, that nature is mechanical or machine-like. The universe is like a machine. Animals and plants are like machines. We're like machines. In fact, we are machines. We're lumbering robots, in Richard Dawkins' vivid phrase, with brains that are genetically programmed computers. Second, matter is unconscious. The whole universe is made up of unconscious matter. There's no consciousness in stars, in galaxies, in planets, in animals, in plants, and there ought not to be any in us either, if this theory is true. So a lot of the philosophy of mind over the last 100 years is trying to prove that we're not really conscious at all. So the matter's unconscious, then the laws of nature are fixed. This is dogma 3. The laws of nature are the same now as they were at the time of the Big Bang, and they'll be the same forever. Not just the laws, but the constants of nature are fixed, which is why they're called constants. Dogma 4, the total amount of matter and energy is always the same. It never changes in total quantity, except at the moment of the Big Bang, when it all sprang into existence from nowhere in a single instant. The 5th dogma is that nature is purposeless. There are no purposes in all nature, and the evolutionary process has no purpose or direction. Well, this is the default worldview, which is held by almost all educated people all over the world. It's the basis of the educational system, the National Health Service, the Medical Research Council, governments, and it's just the default worldview of educated people. But I think every one of these dogmas is very, very questionable, and when you look at it, they fall apart.
But in fact, we see no evidence of that at all. So physicists say by rights we shouldn't exist. This means that at the instant of the Big Bang there was a slight overabundance of matter over antimatter, and here we are as a consequence.
All right.
Oh, okay.
Now, why? This is one of the greatest mysteries in all of physics. We are clueless to understand why. And like I said, if you want to win a Nobel Prize, Figure this one out. Why was it there's a slight overabundance of matter over antimatter?
Yeah, all right. Well, tell us more about these experiments that CERN is doing to answer, or at least try to answer these questions.
Well, they take an atom smasher and they take the energy out of it and put it into a bottle. It's called a magnetic bottle. You can actually trap anti-hydrogen, anti-electrons going around anti-protons. And when they measure the property of anti-hydrogen, it's exactly like ordinary hydrogen, except, of course, they would annihilate it if they touched each other.
Thank you, Tina, for those touching grunts and growls.
Thank goodness for that magnetic bottle that prevents those anti-atoms from touching regular atoms, because that must be quite the bottle.
This was an idea put forward at the beginning of the 20th century by the American philosopher C.S. Peirce. And it's an idea which various other philosophers have entertained, and it's one which I myself have developed into a scientific hypothesis, the hypothesis of morphic resonance, which is the basis of these evolving habits. According to this hypothesis, everything in nature has a kind of collective memory. Resonance occurs on the basis of similarity. As a young giraffe embryo grows in its mother's womb, it tunes in to the morphic resonance of previous giraffes. It draws on that collective memory, it grows like a giraffe, and it behaves like a giraffe because it's drawing on this collective memory. It has to have the right genes to make the right proteins, but genes, in my view, are grossly overrated. They only account for the proteins that the organism can make, not the shape or the form or the behavior.
And that's so frustrating. You want to tear your hair out.
Right.
They were looking for an asymmetry between matter and antimatter. They find none. And so that's the mystery. Why do we exist at all? By rights, we shouldn't be here.
Yeah.
By rights, we should have been disintegrated at the instant of the Big Bang.
Yeah, well, I'm sure there are all kinds of theories out there, but what are physicists kind of focusing in on? Is there one theory, two theories that are kind of the main focus?
Well, the leading theory is something called string theory, which is what I do for a living. I'm one of the founders of the subject, in fact, years ago. But even string theory has a hard time because you have to sort of like put it in by hand. And we want the theory to naturally come out with this overabundance of matter over antimatter, which explains why we don't see anti-galaxies out there and anti-planets. But we have a hard time doing it. So right now, nobody has a convincing answer to this question. Why should we be here?
Wow.
I do this thing where I upload the video on private first to see if there's going to be a copyright claim. And yep, it was from this moment until like another 5 minutes, because I just wanted to play the rest of it so it was all in one place. But you can easily check it out. He talks about some other crazy things, like he noticed in the 1920s to 40s, somewhere in there, he noticed that the speed of light dropped significantly, and he talks about how he asked somebody why that happened and it wasn't accounted for, and they said that he's like, do you just fudge the results? And they're like, oh no, we call it something like value phase locking. I forget what he said, but it's funny. And he also talks about big G, you know, gravity having differences, and you know, because things are constants, it's supposed to be, they, you know, are biased to change the values. So if that's the case, then, you know, how can we really think that that's what's going on, to be blunt? All right, guys, God bless, and you know, all that stuff, right? Much love.